actually LW Tech's 75th anniversary.
Wow.
Serving our community. The Lake Washington School District established this institution in 1949. Our first program was sewing, which is actually going on right now across the hall. Since that time, thanks to our local legislators, we have been named our state's only public institute of technology. Today we offer 12 bachelor's degrees, 42 associate's degrees, and 71 professional degrees from all professional areas, from technology to healthcare to baking and culinary, accounting, etc. So beyond our program offerings to the community, I'm sure as you all came onto campus, you saw our newest building. Thanks again to our state legislators. You're going to hear a theme here in my open remarks. That is our new Center for Design, which will hold our first applied bachelor's degree, our Bachelor's of Applied Design. Again, thank you to our local legislators here. And as well as architectural engineering, gaming, and our art programs as well. It will also host a 500-seat multi-purpose space, so I suspect in the future years we'll have this forum there as well. Our success from the past 75 years and the 30-plus years we've been a part of the community college system, community and technical college system, simply would not be possible without the overwhelming support from our state legislators. And we've been so fortunate here at Lake Washington Tech to enjoy the support from our senator and 2 representatives here who have supported us through good times and bad. And this is another challenging time, which we need your support now more than ever so we can continue to serve the community for the next 75 years. So without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome back to Lake Washington Tech and welcome all of you, Senator Wonka Dingra, Representative Larry Springer, and Representative Dr.
So thank you so much, Amy. Before we get started, we will undertake a very dangerous activity, and that is to try and introduce the elected officials that are here, because if you miss one, it's trouble. So somewhere out there is Kirkland's mayor, Kelly Curtis. Kelly, where are you? And nearby is former mayor of Kirkland and current city council member, Penny Sweet. We also have a former legislator from the 45th and a former King County council member, Kathy Lambert, is here. Where's Kathy? And I think I saw Redmond City Council member Melissa Stewart come in. Okay, who did I miss? School board members. You know, I don't know who all are here, so if you are a school board member, please stand up. Thanks for coming out, appreciate that. We normally start by doing a little introduction for each of us and kind of committees we're on, so we'll start with Senator Dingra.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend and your Saturday morning to be here. My name is Wonka Dingra. I'm the state senator from the 45th Legislative District. I was elected in 2017, so this is my 8th year, and it truly is an honor and a privilege to represent each and every one of you in the Senate. I will say that this year we are focused, as always, in making sure we end session with a balanced budget. We have been very proud in the last 8 years of having a AAA bond rating, of having a budget that speaks to our values. And even with the budget deficit this year, we have to make sure that we're consistent with our values in what we put in the budget. And in the Senate, our priority is K-12, and it is affordable housing, and really making sure that the budget is not balanced on the backs of the most vulnerable in our state. We're very proud of the economy we have, and of the services that we provide, and this is why Washington is rated one of the best states to live in over and over again. And so I look forward to our discussion, and I look forward to talking about legislation. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I chair the Law and Justice Committee. I sit on Ways and Means, and I sit on Environment, Energy, and Technology. So that's a change from the last 7 years where I sat on Healthcare, but now I've been moved to the Environment and Energy and Technology Committee.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm Representative Larry Springer. I'm starting my 21st year in the legislature. I was elected in 2004, began my term in 2005. I'm currently serving and have been for the last 12 years, I think, as the Deputy Majority Leader for the House Democratic Caucus, which makes me a member of our 8-member leadership team for the Democrats in the House. I serve on the same committees I've served on for about the last 8 years, or maybe 10 years. I'm on the Finance Committee. That's the committee that develops the tax policy for the state of Washington. I refer to that committee as the committee that raises the tax money for the state, and then I'm on the Appropriations Committee, which determines how to spend it. Most of my time is spent on fiscal matters given those two committees. My Policy Committee is the Ag and Natural Resources Committee, where most of my work in the last few years has been around making the state better prepared for wildfire and have a swift and accurate response to wildfire and then recovery afterward. As we all know, the phenomenon of wildfire is going to get worse before it gets better, and we need to be prepared. We're doing a pretty good job now, but there's much more work to do. So that's where I spend most of my policy time. And with that, I'll pass it off to Roger, and he can introduce.
Sure. Thanks, Larry. Roger Goodman, thanks very much. First of all, I want to thank Lake Washington 10 for hosting, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out. I'm Roger Goodman. I'm the junior member here in the House delegation. I'm only starting my 19th year in the House. And actually, Larry and I are the two longest serving members in the legislature from the same district. I think, Larry, you rank third, I rank fourth in seniority, so people start to listen to what I say. It's kind of scary. So I am one of the few lawyers in the legislature. Senator Dingert is also one of the few lawyers, and so I've been looking out for the judicial branch of government. And so I serve as chair of what's called the Community Safety Committee, which is the criminal side of the legal system. And also serve on the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, and have in my entire career, which is the civil side, all of our various rights and how to protect them. I also served on the Human Services Committee, which has a wide range of issues related to health and welfare, and particularly my focus is children. These are difficult times, and I don't serve on any of the fiscal committees, but I'm watching very closely how we develop the budget, particularly funding for schools. We'll get further into the budgetary issues and why we're in them. But my focus really is the safety of the community, and we're facing a lot of challenges there as well, coming out of the pandemic and the disruption that it caused in our lives. Crime rates are actually down, but nobody believes it because there's this sense of lack of safety in our communities. And so my focus is crisis outreach on the streets. There's a lot of public disorder, people suffering and languishing on the streets with behavioral health disorders, and I really want to focus on helping them and also giving a sense of safety in public spaces so that the reality, which is that crime is down, will actually be felt that way. And then my other priority is firearms. Firearms are getting into the hands of the wrong people, particularly young people, and we really need to intervene as soon as possible to get guns out of the hands of youth. We're not doing a good job, and we're really struggling with that. So that's something that I'm working on now, and we'll continue to work on even after the legislative session is concluded. So looking forward to your questions, but thanks very much again for coming today.
So we're going through a whole bunch of cards up here.
Turn it off.
Oh,
Okay. The Senate always does that when the House starts talking. We got several questions here, concerns about what the state's response is to the actions either already enacted at the national level and what might still be coming. there's a limited response we're gonna be able to have there, but that's a general question that's been asked several times, so I think we'll just address that one first.
Yeah, I'm gonna stand up so I can see everyone in the back. I think the most number of cards we have so far is about what's happening at the federal level, especially in terms of funding, schools, what's happening with immigrants, and what's been happening with the sweeps, and many questions about how we protect our neighbors and our children. So I'll just start off by saying, when I got elected in 2017, thank you all so much, that was during the first Trump administration. At that time, Washington really did a great job in taking a look at everything that was happening at the national level and making sure we had state laws that were protecting all Washingtonians. So we passed Keep Washington Working, which is really about making sure that in this Washington, we are protecting everyone's rights and that people cannot just be deported without any due process. We also made sure that we were codifying all our reproductive rights, gender-affirming care, and really making sure that under state law, Washingtonians will continue to have the rights that they're used to and want to have. And so, that's okay, yes, you can clap, thank you. And so, this time around, we really made sure to kind of go back and take a look at what we had done and to see if there were other things that we needed to do. So one of the bills that just passed the Senate that's going to the House is called EMTALA. It's the Emergency Medical Act, which basically says that from the federal government, that if anyone is in an emergency, you can go to any hospital and they have to take care of your emergency. The federal government has stopped enforcing EMTALA, which is extremely concerning for people who want to access emergency care. And so we are now codifying EMTALA. That was one thing we hadn't done. And so there are a lot of federal rules that actually we now have to codify, especially with the Environmental Protection Agency going away, really making sure that we are protecting our environment, our clean water, our clean air. And so we have been working very closely with the Attorney General's office, our federal delegation, in really making sure the laws are there to protect each and every one of us. So we have been hearing over and over again about ICE vehicles being at our hospitals, at our schools, picking people away. We've heard about people of color who are citizens who have been picked up and gone for 3 days and then returned. We're hearing about green card holders who have been picked up. Apparently there's a British citizen who's here on vacation who just got picked up and is in our federal ICE in Renton in South King County. So we keep hearing these. Please do reach out to us if you hear about people who are in this country legally and doing what every person has a right to do, being picked up. And we are trying to provide resources that we can help. But please know that you have rights when you are in this country, and that we have to make sure that your due process rights are adhered to. Now comes funding. And this gets more problematic, and this is where our congressional delegation has to make sure, and our Attorney General has to make sure that we are holding our president accountable for illegal activities. And that is in fact what has been happening. Our Attorney General has been doing a great job in continuing to hold that administration to account. So they had canceled Medicaid funding, which would devastate every state in this country. That has been put on hold. They tried to cut funding for research and for science. That again is a lawsuit we have put on hold. They got rid of the Department of Education, and I'll tell you, those dollars come to our special needs kids. Those are the dollars we get from the federal government is for our special needs kids. So we all have to make sure that we're letting our voices heard, that you cannot cut funding at the federal level for special needs kids. I think that's about 6% of the school budget. We have enough of our educators and board members here, so correct me, but I believe that's the amount at the federal level can get rid of for special needs kids. So these are fights that our Attorney General's office is going to have to continue to do when it comes to the funding. Because I will tell you, so far, the vast majority of this has been found to be illegal by the courts, and that process will continue. So that's where the funding issue is, and any federal cuts will be devastating to all states in this country. This is not just a Washington issue. But I will tell you, I'm very proud to be the state that has the least number of uninsured people in the country, because we take access to healthcare extremely seriously. But that is at risk. So that is the big lay of the land when it comes to the federal issues, and I believe that is basically the gist of all of the questions we have so far, and then we can have more discussion.
The one thing I'll add to the questions that we often get about the state response to federal actions that are taken is that if there is an immigration problem where someone is concerned about their status, we are often the ones that get the first phone call. And the response generally is to connect that person or their families to our congressional delegation. Immigration issues are a federal issue. The state is pretty powerless in terms of what we can do about immigration. But we are often the office that gets the first phone call. So we have my legislative assistant, who's around here somewhere, Emily Wills, fields those calls. She and I immediately talk about them and generally end up calling Susan Del Bene or Patty Murray, because that's the chain of command. Not that we don't want to deal with them, but we really don't have the legal authority to do much. So.
That reminds me that we each wanted to introduce to you our legislative assistants. Angela Langer is over there in the court. Please give her a hand. There's no way that we can function. Emily Wills is standing right next to her. And Daisy works for Senator Greenfield.
Roger the Senate does have a little bit more staff. I do want to introduce my Session 8 Fiona, who's also helping us. And then my Communications Director, Angela, who's here making sure we get
Great. And maybe we look good, I'm not sure, but they're the ones who make us look good. So. Just a few comments on what's going on nationally. I feel sort of, it's not refreshing, but I do feel a sense of joy that we are here in a little bit of a bubble of relatively enlightened politics in the midst of the craziness out there. We were just on the House floor and the Senate floor all day and all night, passing bills that actually pay attention to your needs and do try to improve conditions so that you can live better lives. And so dealing with substantive, real issues. And so it's actually a pleasure to be here amidst all that's going on. There are about 67,000 federal employees living in this state, and they are all at risk. Many of them have already been fired or riffed illegally. As Larry and Mark have said, there's going to be the withholding of federal funds that have already been appropriated and committed. That also is illegal. I'm particularly worried about the upcoming congressional budget because they are going to be withholding legally funds that we really need, particularly for health care. And so I was talking to the state treasurer the other day at length about this. Given our budget constraints, we're still going to need to have enough in reserve to cover what the federal government's not going to give us. In the first circumstance where what they have done is illegal, we still have to sue. We still have to go through the judicial process to have it rendered, to overthrow it, and then the funds would come. That takes time, and in that time, we need the funds to carry over. Otherwise, people won't be able to get health care. People won't be able to get housing, education, and so forth. So it's a very precarious situation. The Attorney General, as Marcus said, is really doing the best he can to to join with other attorneys general across the country, and to find examples here in our state, in Adams County, for instance, just the other day, where the sheriff is cooperating with federal authorities to round up people and have them detained and deported. That is absolutely illegal. So our Attorney General is acting on our behalf as well. I guess what I want to say more than anything else is I'm most disturbed by the intentional, explicit cruelty of the federal actions. There's an intentional desire to cause chaos and to traumatize people. And it's not some organized, deliberate effort to rationalize federal funding or anything like that. It's chaos on purpose, and that is cruel, and I detest that. So that's just the statement I wanted to make. And we'll get into the questions now.
As I mentioned, I serve on the Finance and the Appropriations Committee, so it often falls to me to at least begin the discussion of our budget. And a lot of these questions, in fact, the vast majority of these questions up here, are budget connected. Things like, are you going to fully fund special education? Are you going to fund the necessary programs to address housing affordability and homelessness? Are we going to have a transportation package that improves our congestion? All of those are budget related. As you all know, we have a budget challenge this year. It is not, in my opinion, a end-all budget crisis, but it is a challenge. To put it in perspective, Roger and I are one of about 3, I think, in our caucus who were actually here in 2009 for the Great Recession. At that time, we had to cut $9 billion out of a $36 billion budget and do it within a 2-year time frame. This year, we're looking at about 12 to maybe $14 billion out of a $72 billion budget over a 4-year time frame. It's difficult, there will be pain, but it's doable. And the approach in the House is that we will cover that gap, that 12 to $14 billion gap, 50% of that from revenue, additional revenue, and 50% of that from reductions in spending. So you put those two actions together, and we hope at the end of April we will have a balanced budget. We will get a budget revenue forecast next week. That will be the final one we will get before we actually have to sit down and write a budget. So we're kind of waiting for that to come. We're all fairly certain it's not going to be good news. We just hope it's not really, really bad news. But it's news that's going to be problematic. So the struggle that we often have in the budget is people look at $14 billion and you've got a $72 billion budget. Can't be that bad. The problem is about 60% of that $72 billion budget we can't touch. It's debt and obligated funding by law and by federal statute that we can't touch. So then that 14 billion has to come out of a smaller amount. It was the same in 2009, the numbers were just smaller. So we've got a struggle in front of us. There will be some painful cuts. Some of those cuts will take the form of not funding the assumed increase that was going to happen in the next couple of years. You can call that a cut if you want to. It's a function of the agency might still get the same amount they got last year, they just won't get any more. That's a small part of it, and that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easier part. But there will be cuts to actual revenue that agencies had and they will not have again next year and the next 2 years. So stay tuned. We will be sort of struggling our way through that. The Appropriations and the Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate come about mid-April will almost be cloistered. We will not raise our heads to see sunlight for about 2 weeks there while we grind out a budget. Your input in terms of what's of value to you is helpful. We've got several of that up here. A lot of them revolve around the K-12 education system. That's mandated. It's in our Constitution. The struggle is with higher ed, because that is not mandated. So higher ed often tends to take a higher percentage of cutbacks than K-12, but that's the system we're in now. So that's just by way of setting the stage here. That will address a lot of the questions that are up here. So
Just want to say that we are in a budget crunch Not because we have a poorly performing economy. We're actually booming. We have lots of thousands of job vacancies here, right here in the tech industry. Actually, this is where the jobs are: Kirkland, Redmond, and Bellevue. You can tell by the traffic, right? They're coming here during the day and leaving at night, which is another issue because it's not affordable to live here, and so people have to drive here. So, in that sense, we're a victim of our own success, where it's unaffordable to live here, but this is where the jobs are. But we're also a victim of our own success in the budgetary context this year because people are moving here. 125 people a day are moving here to the Central Puget Sound because this is where the jobs are, and they're high-paying jobs. And so they are bringing with them children and older adults and disabled relatives and so forth. And those individuals need help from the state. And so those caseloads, whether it's long-term care or education or disabilities, those caseloads are growing and are demanding the funds that are coming in. So we have increased revenue because the economy is doing well, but all of that increased revenue is being captured by the need to support those folks that are coming in. So instead of an odd situation, we're facing a budget crisis amidst a strong economy, but I just wanted to explain that a little bit.
And I'll just say from the Senate side, sitting on Ways and Means, and I'm also the Deputy Majority Leader of the Senate and part of leadership in the Senate. And so we have been talking about our budget and our priorities and taking a look at it during the interim all last year. Because when we get the budget forecast, we're doing it. So don't think that we don't work year round, even though we are part-time legislators. And so in the Senate, the first thing that all of us do, and I want to make sure everyone understands that, we scrub the budget. And what scrubbing the budget means is taking a look line by line and seeing where we can save money. Have we given a program too much money that they're not utilizing? Is there computer technology that they were supposed to update that they haven't been able to? And then really making the cuts that we can over there. So that scrubbing on the Senate side, and I'm sure it's done on the House side too, has been done, multiple iterations, and we get some savings there. There are also some cuts made around that time, which are painful, but that's what's needed in today's financial situation. So really taking a look at what can be scrubbed so that we're being as efficient as we can. And then the second is really taking a look at where we can stop future growth. So I will tell you, in the Senate, we have passed multiple bills that save us money, and these are cuts that are heart-wrenching because we had so proudly passed Transition to Kindergarten, a program that provides services for pre-kindergarten. And we know in the 45th district, we are really honored that so many of our kids are able to go and go to school prior to kindergarten. And so when they start kindergarten, they actually do really well. We wanted to make sure that opportunity was available to all the kids in our state. We have unfortunately stopped the growth of that program, and we've seen tremendous success. These kids are coming into kindergarten now, ready to learn in a way they haven't in the past. So we know it's effective. We know it's going to help the next generation. We had to make the tough decision not to grow this program because we can't afford to do it. We didn't eliminate it, we paused it. The other program that we have paused, which again was such a successful program, is Fair Start to Kids. And this is about really making sure that we have childcare. And I know as a mom who had to basically send my entire paycheck to pay for childcare, so glad I was married, or still am married, because if I was not a married person living in the 45th, I could not afford to live here and have kids, because my paycheck went into childcare. And so we unfortunately have paused that program as well. Very popular, it was helping families, it was really making sure people could partake in the economic opportunities we had. So we paused that as well. We did a lot of other pauses in the Senate where I actually had a bill that mandated that substance use disorder treatment in our jails and prisons was actually provided by people who were licensed to provide substance disorder treatment. That unfortunately, we're pausing that as well. We'll continue to make sure Department of Health is coordinating with Department of Corrections to make sure the treatment as well, but it's expensive. So there's a lot of cuts like that that we have made, which are dramatic, but needed to balance our budget. In the Senate, we also decided that that is not what the people of Washington want in terms of a cut-only budget. That is not consistent with our values. We saw how harmful that was during the recession, and that is why we had the issues we had with behavioral health, mental health, homelessness, is because of the cuts that order to pay for things that we care for and that we have to. We have now the second to last worst tax system in the country, and so we're trying to continue to try to balance that out. And I want to thank all the voters so much for defeating the initiative and making sure we continue to keep our capital gains tax. To me, the people of the state of Washington spoke very, very clearly that they want a balanced tax code, and they want to make sure that the monies that are raised are going for special ed. I also want to thank everyone who voted to make sure we have a Climate Commitment Act. Because in this state, we want clean water and a transition to clean energy. And so in the Senate, we're committed on making sure that we're not using the Climate Commitment Act as a piggy bank to fund our general fund. The voters were very, very clear that goes for environmental protections. And especially given what's happening at the federal level, we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our environment in the state of Washington. And I'll tell you that the priorities in the Senate is to fund our special needs kids. We passed a special needs bill, it's not in the House, that actually increases funding by $2 billion. And that's because our special needs kids do not have access to the resources they need, and our schools are using local levies that are supposed to be for enrichment to pay for what I consider to be the state's obligation to support special needs kids. And the other thing that's a huge priority for the Senate that we have passed and sent over to the House is making sure our schools have funding for supplies, materials, just like the cost of living, of doing business has increased for everyone in this country. It has also increased for our schools. So making sure that their insurance, their licenses for all the great programming our kids enjoy, just to have the lights on, that has gone up tremendously. And so it's called MSOC, Materials, Operating Costs, and Supplies. So the Senate, we passed a bill to make sure that the state is taking responsibility for MSOC. With those two increases, we have to make sure we're raising revenue. And this revenue, all options are on the table. We're working with our business partners, we're working with the Republicans, with the Democrats, with all stakeholders to see how we can raise revenue in the state so that it is not impacting working people, but making sure we're fixing our tax code. Because when everyone partakes in the success of Washington, people also have to make sure they equally partake when times are difficult. And so my mantra for a successful session is that everyone's going to be equally unhappy. If one group is more unhappy than the other, then we haven't done our job. But everyone's going to be equally unhappy, but we are leading with our values because our budget is our value statement. And I'm very hopeful that you will see when we release our budget on the 24th that the Senate budget reflects those values. Thank you.
I don't sit on any of the fiscal committees, the appropriations or finance or capital budget committees. So I'm sort of like a lobbyist within the legislature. So I have a little bit more latitude. I have always been saying that we have never fully funded our public schools, never. Even though we satisfied a lawsuit almost 10 years ago to provide what was thought of as ample funding. Since then, the percentage of our public funding for basic education is the legal phrase we use for the public schools, has gone down from 52% to 42%. So that at least is what we have to bring up, and I hope in this budget we will. We are severely underfunding special education, as Senator Dingler said. But there's so many other things that we could be doing in our public schools, changing the student assessment model, changing how we evaluate teachers, which actually all costs more. And so I am an enthusiastic yes vote for much more generous funding for our public schools, much more than we're going to be able to provide in this constrained budget environment. But I am concerned about special education because we talk about how those with special needs in the classroom help everyone, that it's good for all students. And yet it's not fully funded. It's not good for all students. So it's an ideal, and yet maybe some of the highly capable students are suffering because not enough attention is given to them. And probably the 80% of kids in the middle aren't getting the attention they need. So really, I am highly stressing that we have to provide much more funding over the course of the next few biennia for our public schools than we are. And to echo Senator Dingler, we need to raise revenue for that. We don't have stable, sustainable, adequate revenue for our paramount duty, our constitutionally protected area of the budget. And so I am sort of distraught about that. In the Great Recession, we cut higher ed to the bone. So colleges had to raise tuition, made it unaffordable for some. We cut the safety net. The safety net was frayed. Those who are the most vulnerable. I thought that was our first responsibility. We cut natural resource preservation, environmental protection. I hope we've learned our lesson not to cut that again in this budget crunch, because in the long run, it costs us more. So those are the statements I'm making on the budget.
One of the things and by the way, this is a very active crowd. We are inundated with cards that we will never get to by the end of this. So I should mention now, if we don't get to your question, let us know when we're back in Olympia. We'll try to address it sort of individually through our offices. Our LAs legislative assistants will go through these. We'll sort of make a stack of those cards that didn't get answered, and we'll try and do it through email and a newsletter that goes out weekly, because there's a lot of questions up here. There was a question that Senator Dingler touched on in her remarks around preserving environmental funding, particularly the Climate Commitment Act. This is a question that I get 3 or 4 times a year from my good friend Ron Snell, who it's not a legislative session if Ron doesn't call me and say, protect that, the Climate Commitment Act. So, Ron, we're going to do that. I know he's in here someplace. The issue around the Climate Commitment Act, because it raises a fair amount of money, it has a target. And there are any number of legislators who look at that funding source as a way to fund other programs not necessarily related to climate. So we are working hard in the fiscal committees in the House to make sure that what we spend that revenue on is actually related to trying to reduce our carbon footprint. That was what the whole bill was about. So it was not there to fund special education. It was not there to fund maintenance on our highway system. It was there to innovate and create industries and technologies that reduce carbon. Simple as that. So we're pretty committed to making sure that we don't dilute that fund by doling out that money into places where, while it could be needed, is not what the commitment was designed for. The voters upheld that, and we need to uphold their truth, their vision of what that was for. So we will in fact maintain that. Let's see here.
There was a question to me, because both of you voted on the rent stabilization bill. It is now in the Senate. Yes, I am a yes on that bill. And then for all the other housing questions, I'll say we don't take a look at just on rent stabilization. We take a look at that entire spectrum. Making sure we have the supply, making sure we have the affordable housing, making sure that we are able to keep people in their house while we build it. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So it's not one or the other. So I'll tell you, in the Senate, we've done a lot of work on the supply side. We have done work on regulations, and then we've done work on making sure people can stay in their houses. I'm always shocked that renting a place in the city of Redmond is so much more expensive than the mortgage I pay on my house. And we have to make sure that people can afford to live where they work. And so, again, taking a look at that entire spectrum of housing supply, housing affordability. And I'll tell you, I'm so proud of the Together Center in Redmond. I talked to all the legislators about how every district in the state needs something like that. We can integrate housing supply with affordable housing. So we're going to continue to work on that, because that's one of the priorities in the Senate. And yes, I do believe in rent stabilization. There's a lot of misconceptions on that. People think it's rent control. There are so many levers in that bill to make sure that our builders can come in, make the buildings, get the profit they need to incentivize them coming in, and then doing rent stabilization down the road. And it is also for that unit, for that contract. It's not attached to the unit, it's attached to the person. So that you cannot have your rent increases 15%, 30% every year. And so I'm happy to see the bill be in the Senate, and I'm really hopeful this year we're going to get it through the Senate. Thank you.
So we'll get to questions out in the audience here shortly.
So Jackie McCordy, Jackie, good to see you, from the North Shore School Board asks about what the Senate just passed over to the House in terms of funding for our basic education program, including $2 billion for special ed, and then for, as we discussed before, materials and operating supplies. The question is, will we support that? The answer is yes, because actually legally we are required to. The appropriators, the budget writers, hired a consultant to determine what's the minimum amount we need to spend on special education without getting in legal trouble, and it happens to be $2 billion. So we're spending the minimum, just letting you know. We're not going to reduce that amount because, again, we'll be in jeopardy because of that. So it's kind of builds on the statement I just made before. We're just spending the minimum, and that to me is inadequate. I wanted to thank and recognize David Emmett because he brought to our attention the issue of homeowners associations. I'm not sure many of you may live in Trilogy or other homeowners associations where the board tends to exert excessive control. There's not enough transparency in terms of funding, and decisions are made without input from the residents. There is a bill that unfortunately David did not make it through the House, but we're going to continue to fight for that because we have to have adequate balance of power between the homeowners association boards and the residents of those communities.
The issue of homeowner associations has come up in the last couple of years around some of the housing proposals that the legislature has initiated in order to address the affordability through the supply side of housing. Rent stabilization was an effort that we all supported up here that tries to maintain rents at a reasonable level. That's on the fiscal side or the rent side. The other way that you get to affordability is through supply, building a lot more housing. The number that we are operating from is 1.1 million. That's the number of housing units that Washington State needs to bring online in the next 10 years. That is an incredible task, be very difficult to reach. But the closer we get to it, the better off we are in terms of what it means for affordability. So we have done things such as allow for accessory dwelling units on single-family lots. We're continuing to work on housing legislation that will spur development, multifamily development around transit centers as a logical place to increase density. There are some proposals out there to allow, it's a little controversial here, but to allow accessory dwelling units outside of the urban growth line. So sort of technically in violation of the law that we passed in 1990. Yet there is a way to do that, and so we've looked at 5-acre plots, for example, that could probably handle a small ADU on it as long as they hooked up to the existing sewer or septic system and that they did not have to bring in another water line. These seem like logical steps to address housing supply. We're under no illusion that approving and incentivizing the building of ADUs is going to solve our housing problem, because it's not, but it helps. The only way we get to 1.1 million units in the next 10 years is for a very aggressive multifamily housing building effort. And we have we can use our tax policy, it's what we do on the Finance Committee, to incentivize that. There's a thing called a multifamily tax credit, where by a developer of a large multifamily project can get a property tax break if the developer includes within that development a certain number of units that are affordable at, for example, 50% of the area median income, or 60%, or 80%, those vary depending on where you are. Kirkland just did that several years ago with the South Kirkland Park and Ride. And so we use our tax policy to incentivize that, but that's the direction we're gonna have to go. The things like trying to control costs through rent stabilization can help, but it's only on the margin. The real answer is supply, supply, supply. And that means building, 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 and that means density, 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 and all of that is very controversial. If you're the next door neighbor to somebody who wants to put an ADU right up against your fence line, you're probably not happy. So hats off to local government folks who are the ones who are going to hear from these people at their city council meetings. There are a number of us in Olympia who come from local government. We're sensitive to that. We don't like to mandate things at the local government level, but at times we need to and we will. So, anything else there?
Another couple examples of bills we're passing related to housing supply. We're wanting to convert commercial spaces to housing. There's a lot of, this is happening nationwide, where strip malls that are sort of abandoned or underutilized are being converted to housing. We passed a bill to make that much easier. There's a lot of burdensome permitting requirements that aren't necessarily rational, and so we have a bill on that too, to streamline permitting for smaller scale condo developments. That went through, I know, our committee, and we passed that as well. And we do have for there's a spectrum of housing needs, those who are, we call it attainable housing, right? Housing that we can afford around here. The problem is that, and this is about local zoning, the buildings aren't allowed to be high enough. So a developer is not going to build a 6-story building where there's a requirement that there be affordable housing, because it doesn't pencil out for that developer. So we actually are going to need higher buildings, 10 to 11 stories, if we're going to densify. That would allow for affordable housing in those buildings. We'll probably be legislating around that as well.
We do have, we're sort of trying to triage the questions up here to try and get at a couple of the general ones here, and then I'm going to bring the mic out onto the floor in just a few minutes and get questions from you all. One of the things that did come up in terms of the budget, the governor is proposing furloughs. Those are very difficult decisions to make. Asking state workers to take a day off a month, or maybe 2 days off a month, depends. And they bear the brunt then of trying to balance our budget. We did that in a budget crunch years ago. Very unpopular, as you can imagine. It has a really bad effect on worker morale. When people come back to work, those that got furloughed are looking with a certain amount of jealousy at those that didn't. It's not something we want to do. On the other hand, the governor controls his own budget. So his agencies work for him, not the legislature. So if the governor decides that he wants to initiate furloughs at some of the agencies, then he can do that. And there's not anything we can do with regard to that. We can only control the staff that works for us at the legislature. And currently we are not considering furloughs.
And I just want to echo that. Our public servants are some of the most hardworking individuals who serve the public. What the federal administration has done with federal workers, and that is something I absolutely do not support at the statewide level. It's expensive for everybody, including our state employees, to live these days. And so telling them that they're going to get a pay cut when no one else in the state gets to have one is simply not fair. And it is not conducive to having public services that meet the needs of Washingtonians. And so I do not think that one sector of the population should bear the brunt when they're the ones who normally can earn a lot more money in the private sector.
Thank you.
But are choosing to stay in the public sector to serve the public. So, thank you.
microphone here in just a moment, but we do have a question here from a high school student. Armand, where are you? There he is. He paged for me the first week of session, so
He's gonna rule the world.
no, he's on his way. It says, as a high school student, what is being done or planned for to create more job opportunities and internships for youth and growing young adults? In many ways, that's the question of our era. That's kind of why we do what we do, is to make sure that the generation that comes up next has opportunity and has a better future that they can look to. In the sense of this specific question, Armand, around job opportunities, there are a number of programs that we have started in the last few years to get high school kids interested in certain job categories, the building trades, for example. Not every family wage job requires a 4-year college degree. Many of them do, and you should be encouraged to do that if you are interested in that. The 45th District is sort of ground zero for the tech industry. Those are college level 4-year degrees. But that does not mean that students shouldn't be able to go to like Washington Institute of Technology and learn culinary arts or game design or dentistry or auto repair. Those are jobs that actually pay very well. Boeing has a program called, blanking on the name for it now. They reach into the high school, they grab sophomores and juniors, and they train them on aerospace jobs and technologies. And then when they graduate, Boeing hires them, or Boeing's supply chain hires them. Those are good paying jobs. And we need more of that, that gets kids interested in a job in high school before they get to college. And those are relatively inexpensive. When you look at what we spend at the University of Washington, or WSU, or the 4 regionals, Eastern, Central, Western, and Evergreen, the cost of an internship in the automotive class here at Lake Washington Technical College is a great return on investment. So, Armand, that's some of the work that we're trying to do. You also asked that you're hearing about youth involvement in vaping drugs and fentanyl, and how can we control the drugs that our kids are exposed to. That is also a cornerstone of what we try to do in Olympia. We try to keep people safe. Roger's the chairman of the Community Safety Committee and probably has more to say about that.
Yeah, there's an intersection of mental illness and substance use disorder and public disorder and crime. We're very concerned about. I had mentioned earlier about young people feeling like they're not safe unless they have a gun in their hands. And this is not people from this community, but there are many communities around King County and other urban areas where young people are growing up in communities that have traditionally, for generations, been deprived of resources, and so there's disorder and dislocation and insecurity. And young people are feeling safe if they stay together and have guns in their hands. Well, if a young person has a gun in their hand, first, second, third, fourth time, somebody's going to get injured and killed. And they're really trying to find a way to intervene with these young people who do not have criminal intent. They're just not feeling safe, but they get involved in groups where there might be a shot caller or someone who does have criminal intent, and then they get in trouble. I don't want them to be sucked into the downward spiral of the criminal justice system because they're just trying to feel safe. So actually, Mark and I are looking for ways to intervene with young people in a therapeutic, compassionate, evidence-based way to get them on the right path. And it's been very difficult. We've been trying for years to do this. And meanwhile, it is getting worse. As to drugs, our approach is the public health approach, to use the child welfare system, not to use the criminal justice system. For 50 plus years, we've seen that that's been a terrible failure. And so if families are in trouble with prohibited substances, fentanyl in particular, we want to intervene through the child welfare system. Again, we are making progress because the fentanyl poisoning crisis is leveling off and deaths are declining. This happens with every substance. It happened with crack, it happened with meth, it's now happening with fentanyl. It's sort of a social learning process. And I could go on forever about why we have these problems because of the laws we put in place that are punitive and not public health based. I think more than anything else in our schools, we have anxiety and depression, and a lot of young people are sort of self-medicating because of that. And so this is something that, again, we're making progress. We have counselors in the schools now for the first time in a long while. Unfortunately, there aren't enough trained counselors, even though we have the funding for it. So constantly swimming against the tide, but I do believe making some progress with regard to bringing down the levels of anxiety and depression and drug use. I can say my son is a senior at Lake Washington High School now, just hearing from the colleges. It's looking pretty good. He's reporting, and I'm observing too, that the Gen Z are not so much engaged in drug use, alcohol abuse, dangerous driving, that sort of thing. They're linked to their devices, and that's causing anxiety and depression. So that's the problem now with our young people. There's unwanted pregnancies way down, and alcohol drug use is down as well. But we really have to pay attention to their mental health because of these stupid devices that have our entire lives inside of them. So that's my comment there.
I'll just say,
I'm coming out the audience.
I do like those stupid devices, so, and it's a great enabler. As so many of you know, I was a prosecutor for nearly 2 decades, and I can tell you that the biggest criminal justice reform we can make in this country is make sure our kids graduate high school. It is about investing in our kids and giving them that opportunity that they need to be successful. And I'm really proud of all the work we've been doing and really making sure our kids actually have access to apprenticeship programs. They have access to getting college credits while they're in high school because of great organizations like where we are right now, like Washington Tech. And I really do want to thank Dr. Morrison for being such a great partner in making sure they're creating more and more opportunities for our children, and not just looking at what they need, but what the future entails. She talked about the School of Design, and I'm just proud to say that the vast majority of satellites currently in space have all been built in Redmond. And Brooklyn, the new Pepper factories in Brooklyn. And what you're going to find is we're going to have a program right here that helps children learn how to build satellites, so they can then just work in the two companies that are providing satellites.
You have just been productive by
So
child.
thank you all, and then we'll go to questions.
Do you have a question? You guys have a question? Okay, I'm going to just walk around with the mic and raise your hand and I'll try to get to you. I will hold on to the mic. So ask a question, no speeches, just a question.
Yeah, thank you for you guys' service, I really appreciate it. What really kind of hit a nerve with me is what Mr. Goodman said about, making sure that people are respectful to each other, not backbiting and all that stuff, And I really feel like you guys have enabled a city of Kirkland, future council members that are running with your guys' March 5th meeting, and I think that was very, very skewed by a certain person that was your guys' precinct officer and labeled people. It was like a hit piece, and I really think that that was unprofessional, and that is causing infight among our own group, right? And doing that was not correct. And I hope you guys don't do that in the future, and if you are, you guys need to figure out why you're doing that.
I think we'll have to talk after because I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the issue, but let's talk about it afterward, okay?
You weren't at that meeting?
No.
I wanted to comment on the rent control. I'm a small rent landlord. I have 4 single-family dwellings right here in Glendias Way. In the last 4 years, my property taxes have gone up 20%. And you are proposing limiting my ability to raise rents to 7% per year. Now that is putting me out of business because I have no control over my taxes. I've got very little control over the maintenance costs. The insurance goes up directly with taxes. And for the state to control my ability to be profitable is going to put me out of business. I've got a choice. I've got a choice at this point. The choice is do a 1031 exchange in Idaho or Arizona or someplace who isn't going to do this. And incidentally, I sent all of you a note saying exactly what I'm saying right now, requested response, and I got no response. My other choice is to sell out. My other choice is to sell out. So what I'm suggesting is by doing this rent control, you are creating more problem than you're solving.
Let me make some answers, okay? Either of you guys want to address that? I will do so.
I'll address 2 things. First of all, each of our offices receives an average of 1 email per minute. 1 email per minute. So if you look at my inbox now, you can see the emails cascading in. It's very hard to respond meaningfully to 1 email per minute. If you want to get our attention, you need to pick up the phone and call our office. Very happy to engage in a phone conversation with you. AJ, if you're here on gun issues, I want to have breakfast with you because you've been emailing me and I want to get to know you better. So you found me at George's in Kirkland 3 or 4 mornings a week. Those are the meaningful conversations. So just want to let you know, if you want to reach our offices, an email is going to go into not in a black hole because we try to read them, but it's really, really difficult. As to rent stabilization, I do believe it's a good policy to limit the amount of rent that my rent was doubled in the last year by the guy who's housing me down in Olympia. And I said, I'm moving out. I can afford it, but I'm moving out because I'm principal. So he relented, so he only raised a little bit. I believe it's good policy to limit, and as to the percentage, maybe that's negotiable, but to limit the amount that the rent can go up while that tenant is in the unit. It's not limiting the rent that can be imposed for the life of that unit. It's about the individual tenants. And many, many people have been evicted or forced into housing insecurity or homelessness in this area, which is really, it's hard to afford to live here by increasing rents. I understand the need for landlords to raise rent. The question is, what is reasonable? The 7% was arrived at because of research that was done as to what is supportable by landlords. There are probably other landlords here who could speak to their ability to live within this 7%. So I'm supporting it because the research shows that it is a good balance. And I also agree in the policy that we should limit what tenants have to bear and give them the option to get out of the lease if the rent increases are unreasonable.
Are there other hands if there are just...
And I'll just add to that. We're not setting base rent. You can charge $3,500 a month. You can charge $4,000 a month. You can charge $8,000 a month. You can charge rent whatever the tenant is willing to pay. The issue is how much are you going to raise in a year? Most people's salaries don't go up by 7% in 1 year. And so that's where that affordability component comes in. If the lease ends and you want to raise the rent, get a new tenant who's willing to pay how much ever you choose to charge for your apartment. We are not saying you have to have a certain amount for that rent. You can have whatever contract you want with whomever you want. The only thing we're saying is 7% per year. If the lease expires, find a different tenant who can pay whatever you choose to charge them to stay in your place.
We have a question here.
Mr.
Realty.
Thank you so much on your position on furloughs. I agree that we shouldn't be balancing the budget on the backs of workers. However, at the same time, I think we could be balancing the budget more on the backs of people who can afford it, that is the very, very wealthy. So, what happened to the wealth tax? I'd love to see that.
Yeah, so I support the wealth tax. The wealth tax would be, you can dial it anywhere you want, establish the thresholds and so forth. Let's just say, if your intangible assets, so let's just say stocks, are worth more than $50 million, I'm not sure, well, you're not gonna raise your hands here, but I'm not sure how many people have a stock portfolio worth more than $50 million, then you're gonna have to pay a little bit of a percent on that, just like you pay property tax on your house, which is another asset that you don't sell, it's what you own. And so if we were to impose, and again, depending on the numbers, it's about 3,500 individuals in this state who have more than $50 million. A lot of them live around here. Half of them are willing to pay and half of them are not. That's just the way humanity is. But we would bring in a good bit of money that way. Well, they can get around it, right? Because they've got so much money and houses everywhere else, they just change their residency, right? So we are estimating that if we were to impose a wealth tax, that we would bring in 10%. So 90% of those other very rich people would find another place to call their residency. They probably spend a lot of time here, but their other residence would probably be in Texas or Florida or another state that doesn't have an income tax. But just by bringing in 10% and letting the other 90% go somewhere else, we bring in a few $1 billion. And so I do support that proposal.
So there is a proposal in the Senate for wealth tax, and that's exactly what it is. It's on intangibles, and it is for those who have more than $50 million. And Roger, just so you know, people in Texas pay more taxes than people in Washington do. And the problem with our tax code is that the richest people among us pay actually the least. And so really making sure that we are trying to adjust that. So that is one of the options, and it is an option that is overwhelmingly supported by most Washingtonians because they do want a balancing of a tax code. So that is absolutely an option we will be considering in the Senate budget.
And I also would support a wealth tax, but I would emphasize what Roger said. It's a fair tax, it's a progressive tax, but I am not convinced that we'll raise nearly the amount of money we think we would like to. So it's a question mark whether we try that or not. There was just an article about Norway has a very long history of a wealth tax, and they got rid of it because it didn't raise any money. So I would hope we don't face that here if we do enact it, but it is one of the concerns. So there was a question down here and then something back here. I'll get to them in a minute.
Hi. So my question has to do with balancing the budget and working with businesses. So you're saying that when businesses hire people, that blows up or expands the base for education and transportation and other critical functions. So is there any way to do a look back with say, I know you do B&O taxes, and I know you do some sort of square footage taxes, but is there a way to do a look back on this is what we had projected, and this is what we ended up with, and doing a back tax on those businesses? Because why should the state be absorbing what is truly a business cost?
I'm not sure the businesses in this state, having owned my own, so it's a topic that I think a lot about and have for 40 plus years. Of all the taxes raised in the state of Washington by Washington residents, 50% are business taxes. Because businesses pay B&O, they pay sales, they pay property taxes just like everybody else. And then they also pay the business and occupation tax, the B&O tax, which is arguably the most regressive tax we have, because it taxes the business based on their gross receipts, not whether they made any money or not. So it's always been a problematic tax, but it raises a lot of money, and so we hang on to it. In terms of a look back, write a budget, which we're in the process of doing right now, our look back is to start from the budget that we currently have, the one that was written 2 years ago, that we're operating under now, and we're able to look at that and say, so how much money did the B&O tax raise? How much did the property tax raise? Did our revenue projections, were they accurate? And if they're not, then we make adjustments as we write this next budget. One of the problems that we're gonna have to come to grips with is that when we wrote the budget 2 years ago, the budget we're operating under right now, we made a projection of what our revenue growth would be. How much would our revenues grow over that 2-year period? Well, they have grown about a third as much as we projected, and that's part of our budget problem. Now, that's on us. It's also on the economy, that, you know, we have while a strong economy here, we didn't raise as much business taxes because businesses have, to some degree, left the state or closed. They're in a cycle, so that happens. So that's the look back, is generally at what were our projections 2 years ago and did they come true? So it helps. So I saw it.
So Janice, I just want to add something more to what you said. Thank you for that question. The look back in terms of we can't send businesses bills for what's happened, but what a lot of people actually may not know is that we have a committee called JLARC, Joint Legislative Audit and Review. And so we actually have one of the most open, transparent governments in the country. So JLARC does a review of all tax preferences or policies we may have that people are like, okay, we're going to institute this new tax, or we're going to give this one business or company a tax preference because we want them to do more business in the state. We then do a JLARC review. So, 5 years down, 10 years down, they will actually do a full audit and review of how is that policy working. Is it working in the manner it's intended? And then they'll make a recommendation on whether it should be continued or tweaked. So we're not just like, people just don't have ideas and submit them. Like, these are processes that have accountability built in. And so the JLARC review every year will come up with, these are the preferences that maybe we need to get rid of because we wanted to encourage this business to come, and turns out not a lot of people took advantage of it. Or they'll say it's not implemented in the manner in which it was intended. Or they may say, that one tax preference really had a lot of businesses showing up and using it, and maybe now, because they're so well established, they no longer need that preference. So we can't send them a bill for all of that, but we have the JLARC review process every single year. It's all on TDW, especially if you guys have a little particular tax preference or any kind of policy that you're like, I really want to know what the audit on that is. Take a look. We have a great auditor's office as well that does all kinds of analysis on a lot of spending and programs, and it does a performance evaluation as well, just making sure it's implemented in the manner intended. So all of this information is available on TDW online, and feel free to email our offices to get that information. And I'll go back to something Roger said about emails. I do read the emails. You may not get a response right away because we do have 1,000 a day coming in, but you will eventually get a response from my office. It might take a little bit of time, but we read all emails coming in before I even go to a committee to get a hearing on a bill or on the floor. My staff right there, Daisy and Fiona, they're compiling them all. So I know exactly how many people have emailed me on each bill. I know what they have said and what the issues and concerns are. So those emails are read, we pay attention to them, and I want to thank all of you for sending in all those comments and emails.
I didn't mean to say I don't read them, but I do. It's like, sitting wherever I am, there's always something to read because it's email always coming in. If you're spending your time watching TVW, you need to get a life. Just don't do it. My son said, because I said, I was on TV, he said, oh yeah, that channel that nobody watches. But I did want to comment on tax preferences, tax incentives. This is using the tax code to try to incentivize businesses to stay, and so forth. One example that just came up recently was gold bullion. They're actually giving a tax exemption to the gold bullion industry. How? Gold bullion? They don't need it. They actually do. Because the way gold is, and it's up in the northeast part of Washington State, there still is gold that's mined. It's fairly expensive to do it. And so to keep that industry in the state, we actually have to provide a tax incentive for the gold bullion industry. It's sort of ironic that you might think that. The biggest tax exemption in the state? Food. You don't pay tax on food. That's about 85% of the tax exemptions. And the Republicans got rid of that tax exemption back in the 1980s and lost control of the legislature as a result. So don't worry, we're not going to get rid of the tax exemption on food.
So we've got a question here. Yeah.
This is a follow-on to the gentleman who asked a question about rent control. You addressed the one side of the equation, which was rent control, but the other side is the increasing property taxes. We're in a home, we've been in a home for 35 years, and our value of our home has increased probably 7-fold. And there's no regard to that. I know that there's some controls in terms of how much you make, that you can get your property tax reduced, but that's the other side of the equation. If there was some kind of control in terms of how much that property tax increases, that would really help. Right now, what's happening is, for folks like us, really you're driving us out of the state, really, because if you can't afford the property tax on your home.
Property tax is a bit of a conundrum. In that the state of Washington has not raised property tax in 30 years. All the property tax increases, other than valuation, comes from locally, in most cases, locally voted initiatives, schools, libraries, fire districts, and the like, transportation projects. So that doesn't mean they haven't gone up. It's just that the state hasn't increased our share of the property tax. The struggle we have at in this state, which is why we are next to last for a regressive tax system, is we have 3 taxes that fund 80+% of the budget. Sales tax, very regressive, particularly for lower income families. B&O tax, very, very regressive for businesses who are taxed not on their profit, but just on how much revenue they take in. So for example, a car dealership, tons of revenue on a 1% margin. A jeweler, pretty good revenue on a 50% margin, but they get taxed the same. So that's the unfair nature of the B&O tax. And then lastly is property tax, which is at least somewhat progressive in that it's tied to value, but the values around here, we hear about it all the time. And you're right, sort of that we've sort of tinkered around the edge of it a little bit by increasing the threshold above which you pay your tax. So Monica can speak to that because I think you had a bill to do
That was my bill. I completely sympathize with you on property tax, especially for retired people. And that is because we don't have an income tax in the state of Washington, so it's property taxes. And for people who are on fixed income, and this is one of the consequences of affluence, right? We are a very popular district in the state. People want to move here, so our property value is going up. People want to live here because of the parks and the trails and our schools, and so it makes it more expensive for people on a fixed income to continue to live here. And it is a huge, I completely understand that, but without an income tax, there's really property taxes, B&O, and sales tax. There are no other options. I had worked on this bill years ago to actually make it more affordable for our people on fixed income to continue to stay in the district. And so please make sure you reach out to the King County Assessor's Office to see if you qualify for this. But we've raised the amount of money that you have in order to qualify for an exemption, and that is regionalized in each area, so that in our district, it is based on our district's affordability, not statewide. Because earlier it was statewide, and so most people in our district couldn't qualify because it was such a low threshold. And then we have done things like, your costs for medication and your other costs that you need for basic living are excluded from it. So my office gets questions all the time about this. The King County Assessor actually has a lot of information on his website to see if you can qualify, so you can continue to stay in your house. So please reach out to the King County Assessor, reach out to our office. We're always happy to help people make sure they can qualify. But this is what happens when you have an upside down tax system. The taxes borne by people who really should be the one bearing it. And in order for us to get a really fair tax system, it's gonna take the voters to really demand that we need a more fair system of taxation in the state of Washington.
Okay, we've got 2 or 3 more questions here that we're going to try to raise through.
So I wanted to try to unravel things. First of all, we're not the second most regressive in the country. We're now the 3rd most regressive. Florida just amended their constitution, so Tennessee and Florida are worse than we are. Just want to let you know. When I go into Kingsgate, Kingsgate's sort of a classic middle-class American neighborhood, just a great place to live. In the old days, people could afford to live there, and when I go to Kingsgate, people are, we'll say, house rich. That's all they have. And the taxes, because of the high values, are driving many of them out of the place they lived with their families and so forth. And I really lament that. Again, this is a function of our not being able to bring in revenue from other sources. And yet we're trying to raise the threshold for those who earn a certain amount to be exempt from that or to have the tax amount reduced. But there are a lot of competing pressures here. So the state law limits the amount that property taxes can be raised by 1% per year. This was passed by initiative back in the 1990s. That is hampering local governments, counties and cities, from providing the resources necessary. There's this constant increase in demand for resources because of population increase and so forth, but the line of revenue is the same. So there's this what I call the alligator jaw that's been developing for 20 years now. We would like to be able to provide local jurisdictions a little bit more flexibility to raise property taxes, and yet that puts pressure on what we were just talking about, those who are in homes whose values are increasing and maybe taxed out of their own neighborhoods. So we're really caught in a dilemma, but overall it's because we're not bringing enough in the overall.
Okay, we've got 3 more
I just,
questions.
that's a bill we had in the Senate. I just want you to know that we wanted to exempt the first household from property taxes. And we want to do an exemption for that, but we need the Republican support to do that because you have to amend the Constitution to allow for a homestead exemption that goes to exactly what you're talking about. We had 0 support from our Republican colleagues to get that across the line.
Okay, we're going to try 3 more questions. We got 1 here, 1 there, and 1 over there. Right, go ahead.
I'll try to be super quick. Thank you for your support for education, especially alternative education environments for people who are non-traditional learners. And I want to highlight one that's education of all ages possibility to move forward. Libraries, and in particular, one of those questions up there is from someone I met tonight, Susan, who depends on the Braille Library. So please make sure that that's on your radar for continuing funding so that we can all be learners throughout our lives. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That library is, I think it's in Vancouver. There's a Braille Library and a School for the Deaf that the state has been funding for decades. So you have a question here. Yeah. Oh, there.
So you explained the aggressive density in housing that is on the plan. Can you help us understand what the plan is for the infrastructure to go along with that density?
Excellent question. The biggest piece of that infrastructure to address density is our transportation system. And that's why the increased density that we generally talk about is focused around transit centers to utilize public transportation, mass transit, as opposed to single occupancy vehicles. It won't end the use of the private car, of course, but if we put that kind of density in those locations, the theory goes that there will be more people riding and using transit than having to drive, 5 miles to get someplace to get a quart of milk. The other density that goes around with that, or the infrastructure rather that needs to go along with that kind of development are water and sewer systems, obviously, parking infrastructure, and public places. It's one thing to build a multifamily development somewhere, and another to do it with some green space that people can actually enjoy. So that's part of the infrastructure. Oftentimes that falls to the developer and is part of the development plan. So hopefully we're trying to do that. So
So on this ad, we have two great examples of that in our district. Kirkland, that's the transit-oriented development that you see in Totem Lake area, where you have light rail that's gonna, or you have the big transit center there, and you have the housing there. You're seeing that now in downtown Redmond, next to light rail, where you have that density. And so it is tied to infrastructure, and our developers do pay an impact fee that goes to help with environmental issues, infrastructural issues, and our public school, to make sure that we do have a plan for all the needs that come in when more people move into the district.
So, the young lady over here modeled really good behavior and said, I came late, did you discuss Medicaid? I said, yes, we did, we'll talk about it afterward, so, thank you. But I saw another hand somewhere, right here, yeah.
I wanted to ask a question, whether there is any effort underway to reform the tax system. You have explained that it's property valuation rather than tax rate that's causing the increase in tax burden. You have also explained that we have one of the most aggressive tax systems by state in the country. And so is there an effort underway to sort of look at the tax system in total and to reform it?
Okay, so my Springer is now going to put on his green eye shade and talk about cold pizza in a windowless room, right?
What Roger is referencing is that I've been an advocate of some sort of consolidated effort to revise our tax code, and I've sort of characterized it as 4 or 5 smart economists that get into a room that's very dark. They have green visors and sharp pencils, and we just bring them pizza until they design a new tax code. Ironically, we actually kind of did that a few years ago, led by Senator Noel Frame, who was, I think, a representative at the time, and led an effort to try and rewrite our tax code. It was marginally successful, but where it fell apart was around, again, the wealth tax, when we received no Republican support for it at all. And we needed Republican support out of that, because that was a bipartisan committee of equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and they had to agree for that to be a proposal, and it fell apart. And so the answer to your question right now is there's not really much going on.
Although I do want to comment that there is an urgent need. There is no greater problem or obstacle to providing the resources we need and to invest in making our communities safer and more prosperous than our upside-down tax system. Just like on the federal level, the big problem is money in politics. Elections and policy on the federal level is tinged by the undue influence of money interest. Here in the state, our upside-down tax system is preventing us from accomplishing what we want. And so effort after effort for decades now to revise the tax structure has not been successful. And so it is very frustrating.
Okay, we have one last question here, which is seeking enlightenment, she says.
I'm a state worker. I work for the Department of Corrections with the Graduated Reentry Unit, which I know is saving the state money by getting people out of prison. But you said that the governor puts a budget forward and you guys can't do anything about it, but don't you have the ability to modify, reject, approve?
No, the legislature holds the purse strings.
Oh, okay, so you could.
This is what's going on at the federal level, where the executive thinks that they can spend the money. It's up to us.
There's nothing on furloughs out.
I also wanted to say, I created the Graduated Reentry Program. I'm the author of it.
Thank you. I love my job.
So we allocate funding to agencies, and I will tell you in the Senate budget, I'm not a proponent of using furloughs as a tax-saving mechanism to reduce the amount we're giving agencies. Once we allocate to the agency, the governor can make changes to that agency. And so the furloughs can then come from him once those dollars are allocated to do savings. But I will tell you, in the Senate budget, I am not in favor of using that as a mechanism to determine how much money goes out to agencies to begin with.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're right on time. We could probably take another question here. Go ahead, Mr. McKinney.
So I'm really provoked to talk about the tax situation. When I moved to Washington, I sold my house in California. I bought here for the same money. I cut my property tax in half and doubled my square footage. And I took a pay cut in order to do that. And well, then I went to the grocery store to buy stuff. And I noticed that the cost of stuff at the Safeway in Kirkland was pretty much exactly the same as it was in the San Francisco area in California. And I thought, this is really weird. These people are paying less property tax, they're paying no employees income tax, and yet they're charging me the same for the stuff. And then I realized it was exactly what Representative Springer talked about. It was the B&O tax. That when you go to the ice cream store and you buy an ice cream cone, you pay 10% of that to sales tax. You pay 10% of it to the B&O tax because it comes right off the top. And then the owner of the store gets nickeled and dimed with utility taxes, property taxes, employee taxes, and suddenly it's exactly what he said. 50% of the cost of that ice cream cone goes to the government. So we may have an upside down.
Is there a question?
We may have an upside down tax code, but we're not going to solve it by adding more income tax to our existing broken tax code. And so I support the idea of a total rewrite, not an add-on. So we aren't going to solve this problem by adding more taxes to our system. We're only going to solve it by making our incredibly regressive B&O tax system go to zero.
And so what we would do at a time like this is say, and don't you agree? Therein lies the question.
Any final comments here, and then we'll be happy to hang around for a bit too to chat with folks. So.
I'll just make a final comment. These are difficult times economically for many, particularly difficult times politically, nationally. I wish that we weren't so polarized, and I wish that those who are elected were well-meaning. I believe that the three of us here are earnest and want to improve conditions in our communities, take our jobs very seriously. I have to say, when I'm down in the arena, in the legislature, with people who have very different points of view, it's refreshing. It's actually very important for all of those disagreements to happen in an agreeable manner. We are all well-meaning. We really are all wanting to improve conditions and do the best. And so it's refreshing to be here in Washington State, where we're trying our best despite disagreements. But it is very distressing to see what's happening on the national level. And I'm not watching the news. I'm just sort of watching a lot of sports these days, which I do anyway. But it's hard not to get angry, frankly.
To put a light, sort of positive spin on the legislature and what happens in that huge building in Olympia, if you turn on TV or read the newspaper or turn on the radio or stream on your phone, and you are inundated with the politics of Washington, D.C., it's terribly depressing. And it just seems so dysfunctional. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case in Olympia. We actually get along pretty well. In fact, a group of us, Republicans and Democrats in the House for years, have gotten together once a week in the back room of a restaurant and have dinner, have a few glasses of wine, rarely talk politics, usually tell family stories or lie to each other about things we used to do. And it's what it builds are friendships and relationships that when it's time to disagree and argue over policy, it stays on the policy, it does not become personal. We take care of one another, and I will give you a good example that happened just this week. Republican member of the House, Tom Dent, represents the Moses Lake area. His son was shot in the middle of last week in a gun altercation with some other people. He's okay, he's going to survive. But Tom got word of that. We immediately called the governor's office. The governor's office sent over the state patrol. They took him to the governor's airport, and the governor flew him to Spokane. Tom got to see his son. They flew him back. And the next day, Tom came into the Democratic caucus room to thank us. And there was not a dry eye in the place. Tom is a wonderful guy. We just don't always agree policy-wise that the sun came up. But we love him, and he knows that, and that is, in fact, what happens in Olympia. So I hope that's good news.
I'll just end by saying thank you to each and every one of you for coming out here, for engaging. This is what I love about the 45th District. We can have discussions on serious topics in such a civil way. And to me, this is what democracy looks like. Making sure people from all walks of life, of all ages, can come in and have discourse. Even with the crawling babies, one of my favorite parts. And so it really is an honor for all of us to represent all of you. And I again want to thank Lake Washington Tech for opening up this auditorium for us year after year, and to a wonderful staff for their service to all of you. And I want to echo exactly what the representative said. In the Senate, about 95% of our bills are bipartisan. Last year, 100% of my bills were bipartisan, including my gun bill. And that one shocked me, because I went to my Republican colleagues and I'm like, did you seriously vote for that? And it's because I have built trust with them. They know that when I talk about policy, I'm serious about policy. It's not about politics. And that is how we make sure we take care of the people of Washington. And that is what we're always committed on doing. This is why our state has that AAA bond rating. This is why we're rated routinely as one of the best places for businesses and for people. And this is why we enjoy the lifestyle that we do. And that is what we're all committed to protecting. That each and every one of us feels safe, feels welcomed, feels heard, and that you're proud to be a Washingtonian. And I cannot tell you how many times in the last 7 years I have said, thank God I live in Washington. So thank you for being here, and thank you for all of your participation.